no Christmas is complete without the traditional Christmas Day turkey. So today I'm going to be going through how I cook my traditional Christmas turkey. It largely follows the recipe my parents used since probably the 1950s, but I have over the years expanded it and mended it a little bit. So we're going to be having turkey with sweet and savoury stuffing, handmade, not from the supermarket. Potatoes roast in goose fat and a little bit of cinnamon. Sprouts with a modern twist, marmaladed carrots, and my favourites, honey glazed parsnips. So the preparation starts the night before. The parsnips are best cleaned and prepared the day before. You have more than enough to do on Christmas morning. So I take some fairly large size parsnips so they can be cut down. It's better to have them a little bit fatter and wider so that they can be prepared and cut in half. I don't parboil. I think parsnips, the flesh opens up and becomes too mushy if you parboil. That's my personal opinion. So I take the parsnips, crop the ends off. I'm going to split them lengthways. So a quick snip off the end of each one. And although you can skin them, a lot of the flavour is actually in the parsnip itself. So what I do instead is use the smaller blade just to scrape the surface, having washed them. So washed, trimmed, and then grated gently, scraped. It opens up the pores, allows the flavour in without losing the natural texture and flavour of the skin itself. There, just scraping them off very quickly, very loosely. And I only cut off slightly messy, grubby, less presentable little parts of the parsnip. And I cut lengthways, ideally splitting it so that the narrow end isn't too small. If you have a very large parsnip, you can cut it into 3 pieces, so kind of halfway and then the wider section in half. If it's too narrow, it tends to burn and crisp. If it's too fat, it doesn't cook all the way through. And it's important to use sweet parsnips, which you get in Britain. Some parts of Europe you get a parsnip which isn't sweet, and that's generally countries where the parsnip is seen as feed for animals. So we've cut them in half, and then we just give them a very quick wash underneath the tap again. And then we have to prepare the bowl because we're going to leave them overnight to allow the flavour of the honey and spices to seep. You can just put the parsnips in any plastic or Pyrex bowl. Here I've just taken a terracotta bowl, and you don't need to be sparing here. This is Christmas dinner. We're not trying to cut the calories. So I take a knob of butter, rub it in so I've got a nice thick layer of, let's face it, fat, which is going to stop the parsnips from sticking, but also some of that flavour will come into the parsnip. And then I just lay them around as thickly as I can, really. You want them all to have space. You want the sauce to cover the top and the bottom of the parsnip, but really there's never enough space, particularly with the weird shapes of parsnips. So we experiment with a few positions. And ideally get a little bit on the top as well as the bottom of the parsnip. It's perfectly fine to roast parsnips on their side. They're good as a veg that you can slide on the side of the vegetable dish. So having given up on putting them in that bowl neatly, you can prepare the honey glaze in a separate bowl and mix it and put everything together in there. But fundamentally, I'm doing it very simple. So I just get runny honey, pour it liberally over the parsnips. It doesn't need to be perfect. If you have a pastry brush, that's great. I didn't have one to hand when I was cooking this, so I just spread it liberally with my hands, having cleaned them, obviously, between shots. And you want a good liberal covering of the surface. Don't be miserly with the honey. And then a thick liberal sprinkling of pepper and a little dusting of salt just to get some flavour in. You can do this at the time immediately before cooking, but when you're juggling all the elements for Christmas dinner, I do it the night before. So now we move on to the turkey, what probably people think of as the first element of the dinner, because the turkey takes a long time to prepare. You can cheat a bit on this. You can buy a crown. Crowns cook very well. They don't take anywhere near as long. The benefit is that they don't have the drumsticks, which a lot of people don't like as much. Though it's a little bit more like cooking a big chicken. You can also buy frozen, although a lot of people are snobbish about frozen turkey. They generally do cook just fine so long as they are properly defrozen, not left for too long, and treated properly. The size of the bird is probably more important. This is as small a full turkey as I would want to cook. I think it was about 7.5 kilograms. I would go down to 5. Below 5 kilograms, you don't cook it for long enough for all of the juices to come out, and you don't have as much stuffing and flavour. And you have to remember when you cook it, you're not just timing for the bird itself, but for the stuffing. And here we had about 1.5 kilograms of stuffing. So it's important as giblets. You take out the giblets, they should be in a bag or a net inside of the turkey itself. Take them out and put them to one side and thoroughly wash the turkey. Again, wash your hands before, wash it inside, outside, open the neck up, run some water through, splash, thick splash of salt, and fill the body with water. Pour it out. I would do that at both ends. You're going to be stuffing the neck and the rear of the turkey, so it's important that it's cleaned, and also salt always brings more flavour to the meat. And I tend to try and avoid undoing the rope. Maybe it's to do with my cooking style, but when you actually come to tie the legs, it's much easier if you've got a good cord to use the one that's already there and just tuck it back in the same as the way they did when they prepared the turkey. Be careful to try and hold the turkey with 2 hands. Although you can manipulate it a lot, you don't want to break the back of it. Now I salt the surface and cut a knob of butter or any sort of spread like that. You can use a fat. You don't need anything particularly fancy because this is going to burn off, but it just allows the meat to open up and helps it with the length of time you're going to be cooking it. It's not like cooking a chicken where you're maybe 1.5, possibly 2 hours. I'm going to be cooking this for probably 6 hours. So it's best to cover the whole surface, and it helps the bacon, which I'm going to lay along the top of the turkey, to stick and also absorb some flavours. Helps to loosen up the meat itself, and you want to be liberal with it, but not too thick. You don't particularly want to see it, but you want it a little bit greasy with that. I then put it in a good roasting dish that has ideally a collection at the bottom for the grease and fats that are going to run out of the turkey. tuck it in. Doesn't need to be too tight in the aluminium foil. Little bit of breathing space is good. And you want to be able to open it easily to check on the turkey. Now I'm going to quickly prepare the gravy for the stock for next day. We put a little bit of water in a saucepan, small saucepan. It's gravy, you don't need a huge one. Put 1 onion without the skin, 1 carrot, a nice chunky one with the ends cut off and a little bit of cleaning. And that's going to all create a vegetable stock as a start for the process. Then take out the giblets and the neck. You can't really eat the neck, you can't do much with it. Just put it in there, some of the natural juices will come out. You're going to see the heart and the liver also in there. The heart, put it straight in to the pan and use that. Add a little salt and pepper and just leave it. Don't heat it up until the next day. Put a cover on it ideally. You set aside that liver. We're going to chop that up for the savoury stuffing. So now we're making the sweet and the savoury stuffing. You're going to need some oil, some treacle, 2 cooking apples, about 2/3 of a lemon, bit of breadcrumbs, mustard, ideally English mustard, something a bit punchy, some raisins, sultanas, and obviously the sausage meat. So put the sausage meat in the bowl. Spread liberally some breadcrumbs. Obviously you don't have to buy the breadcrumbs, you can make them. A little bit more never hurts. And then squeeze in the lemon. You don't need a full lemon, a half lemon, a little bit more, just enough citrus zest to get the process going. Try not to put any stones in or pips. But squeeze all that juice out. You can just use a little jar of lemon juice. Then a good dollop. Really, it's about 2 tablespoons of mustard. And again, you can use Dijon or Chinese, but I would suggest ideally using something like Coleman's. Then spread in another 1.5 tablespoons of golden syrup. And it doesn't all need to be precise. This is... Then mix it in thoroughly with a fork or a spoon, or you can use your hands. You are going to have to use your hands in a minute when we stuff the turkey. Spread in some oil, and I just used vegetable oil there. Then I mix in a handful of sultanas. Again, doesn't need to be exactly precise. Another few don't hurt. And again, mix it in again. It starts to become quite stodgy, and that's what you're using the oil and the treacle for, really, just to hold the whole mess together. Then I skin the 2 cooking apples and chop them into small pieces. You really do want it nice and small, but chunks. You still want it chunks. A bit like when you have an apple sauce with your turkey. You don't want to have a puree like baby food. You still want to feel and see some chunks in the meal itself. And as a side, you can easily make your own cranberry and apple sauce. I've kept it simple here, so we're just going to use store-bought for that. So now we've made the sweet stuffing, which is more complicated. Put a little bit more breadcrumbs in and a last mix. Leave that bowl to one side. And we're going to move on to the savoury stuffing after add a little bit of salt and pepper. And again, mix it in. Every ingredient added give it a little mix. Ideally a glass bowl. It will stick to a plastic bowl. You won't get the same mix. I'll finish that off. That's the sort of constituents you should have. A big dollop like bread before it's put in the oven. Then we take the other sausage meat, and a lot less added to this one. So take the glass bowl, pop the meat into that. There may be a little paper on the base of it. I often like to get the tubes of sausage meat. They're a lot simpler to work with. So then I've got parsley. You can use fresh parsley. You're going to roast this for 6 hours, so you're not going to get the fineness and sweetness of fresh flavour of parsley in there. So it's perfectly fine to just add some from a spice jar. Then take that liver which we took from the giblets bag, probably about half of it, depends on the size, but give it a good chop. You want it very finely chopped, and then we're just going to mix that in. Don't worry if it's quite small, the pieces. It's good to really chop it up very finely. And you don't have to have a savoury stuffing, but it is quite tasty. It's good to have the two. Then put it in and just hand mix it. You can use a spoon or a fork, but as with the other stuffing, you're going to have to use your hands to put it inside the turkey, so you might as well embrace the dirtiness of this meal. It's then nice and gloopy again. Probably doesn't need as much oil. You may need to add a little bit of oil. You probably don't need breadcrumbs to hold it together. Then we stuff it. So you can put them in either end. I normally put the sweet in the neck end, savoury in the other. Sometimes the body cavity is a lot larger and you end up having a bit of a mix. Just push them all down. You want to feel the turkey gently expanding because the whole of the cavity is full of that stuffing. And I would say, as a side note, when you've finished and you've carved the turkey, you really should separate the stuffing. The stuffing will be safe to eat if it's kept in the fridge for probably a couple of days. Goes well with cold meals or can be rewarmed. But the turkey can last a few days longer in the fridge, and particularly if you're going to freeze it, chop it up, use it for another dish, you do want to separate them straight after the meal. Then we stuffed it. We put bacon rashers along the top. I've liberally rubbed butter on the skin of the turkey, sprinkled it with some salt and pepper. And I tried to cover the whole of the top with bacon. Streak is good, doesn't need to be expensive or high quality. You just want something to stop the skin from burning as much as possible. Although I think, as you'll see later, this didn't stop it from burning. And you can actually eat it. Not everyone likes it, but roast bacon as a small piece on the plate is not really a problem for me. Then we put it in the foil. And we make sure that the foil is long. You want it to be the whole length of the turkey plus a bit, and the sort of wings of the aluminium, you want to be able to fold that over so you entirely envelop it. And ideally you can join in the top, because you're going to have to open it to check on the turkey, to get some juices out, to poke it to make sure it's properly cooked and see the progress. So ideally a baking tray which has a support to lift the turkey from the bottom, because there is going to be oils running out of it. Now we've put the turkey in the oven without turning it on, left it overnight. Now it's the morning. We've turned the turkey on. I generally turn it on around 6 or 7 in the morning. Then I'm coming to the sprouts. So the sprouts are simple, but there's a lot of them. So I tend to do them in the morning, couple of hours before I'm actually going to cook them. And I get a nice glass bowl, take each one, cut off the excess leaves, any dirt, any little imperfections that won't look very nice when they're cooked. And I take those leaves. You can use those leaves for stock, or if you're frying the sprouts like I am, you can throw them back in when you're cooking it. Now I'm actually doing sprouts boiled and then gently pan fried in a little bit of brown sugar with chestnuts. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to buy chestnuts already cooked, prepared, and I just take them out of the packet, chop them into probably eighths. You don't want them in halves or quarters, they're a little bit too big. And then you just go through each of those and put them on a little plate to one side. If you're doing them an hour or two before you're going to use them, that's fine. And then you don't have to do that prep at the last minute. You don't have to include garlic, but I do love a little bit of garlic. So just chopping it up, taking some of the cloves out of the garlic. And putting that to one side. I'm going to prepare the carrots. You could do the carrots many ways. It's quite nice to do this recipe with pre-cut carrot batons, but I'm going to use just normal carrots. Wash them, clean them, chop the ends off, take the skin off lightly, not too thickly, and repeat for each carrot. I would probably recommend 2 carrots each, maybe 3 if someone's a little bit hungry. And as you can see out the window, a typical Christmas day with no snow and fairly warm. So chopping those up, I've skinned them all down, I've cut them, and I'm going to cut them into wedges, sort of quarter lengthways. And if they're really long, I'll also cut them in half because I want them fairly small for this recipe. And you can just put them in as part of the roast and roast them, or if you're a little bit low on the space in the baking tin, then you can do what I'm going to do here, which is put them in marmalade and boil them, and we'll come back to that. If you're doing that, then you do need them smaller. You don't want them as long. If you're roasting, you probably want them full length. Now we're skipping back to the gravy. We made this stock earlier. We've left it overnight. The flavour has seeped out, and we've got a mixture of the neck, the heart, a carrot, and a skinned onion. And we can now gently put that on the heat. We don't want it to boil fully, but we want to really infuse that flavour and create a very rich stock to add the juice from the turkey to. Now the turkey's been cooking for a little while, but just checking up on it, you can see that the stuffing is already starting to brown, the bacon is. The turkey has a very long way to go, but we've still got another few hours here. And I just take it out probably after about 2 hours, and then maybe every 45 minutes or so. Want to take this excess oil out, set it aside in a cup, because we're going to add this later to the gravy bit by bit. Don't pour it all in, might well be too much, but at the same time, good to get it out. I did used to have a turkey baster, which is great for this. You want to take that juice and pour it over the top so that you maintain a level of juice that the top of the turkey doesn't burn, and at the same time it really helps with the flavour. Now I'm going to put the turkey back in after I've basted it in the juices, and it's time to move on to the next part, the potatoes. You can actually prepare the potatoes the night before, so long as they get put in water immediately and covered, but really they should be done closer to the cooking time. I'm going to parboil the potatoes, so we're going to clean them, skin them, chop them into half fist size portions, and then we're going to bring them to the boil, and as they come to the boil we're going to switch it off, drain it, and we're going to put them in the pan and roast them. But you're going to be roasting them for about 45-50 minutes if you've parboiled them. So it's good to have this prepared, because in that last hour you're going to be checking on the turkey, making the gravy, doing the sprouts, and all the carrots, all the different sections. So then the carrots we prepared earlier, we boiled them. While they're boiling and I've parboiled, I've put very liberal, doesn't need as much of that, in a pan of goose fat. Still got my carrots to one side. So then I've drained my potatoes and they're ready to go. Ideally, you want that pan to have the fat very hot, ready to almost fry. So ideally I would put it on a surface on top of a gas hob or such when that fat is just gently popping, and I'll put the potatoes in and stir them around on top of it. If you've got a very starchy potato, you might want to squeeze them slightly. So pour them in, stir them around a little bit. You want to get that fat onto all of the surface, and ideally sear it very slightly. When you sit the potato, the bottom of the potato is going to harden. If you can get some of that fat on all of the surface, the whole surface will be a little bit more crisp. So I stir them round for a minute, and then I start stacking them. So put them on the narrowest end, take up as little space as possible, squeeze them all in, and I put them down to one end of the pan. And at this point I've turned the heat off. You can still see it simmering away there. Then I've got them in place, and I'm going to take those parsnips I made the night before. They've already been glazed in honey and salt and pepper. But before I do that, a little bit of cinnamon. That's a personal thing. I got that from seeing Greek cookery. And having added that and some sprigs of rosemary in between, I put them in fairly liberally. You're not going to eat these sprigs, they're going to be gone, but the flavour really does seep into the potatoes. Then I bring out my parsnips that we prepared the night before and squeeze them into the empty space here. Now you can put the carrots in here as well, but one of the reasons I moved from roasting my carrots to marmalading them was that there's never enough space in the pan. So this is probably enough for 4 people, 5 people. You only need one person who's a little bit hungry, or let's say greedy, and you just don't have enough space. And quite often in a smaller dish you have a lot less. You do want some leftovers, because you're going to have a lot of meat left over, and you can do recipes like I normally do a Boxing Day curry, and it's good to have vegetables as well as meat to go into that. Now the honey flavour there, nothing wrong with just spreading that around a little bit. You don't want it to be swimming in it, but you do want that honey flavour in your parsnips. So we're moving to the carrots. I've basically put a small portion of water, about 200 millilitres, added in the carrots, and you'll see here why I chopped them in half when they were too long. You really want baton sized. And then I take a whole jar of marmalade, spoon it all out, come out in big dollops in a pan, and you're not going to boil it, you're effectively going to steam it. So just gently warm it so that marmalade melts and give it a stir. Sprouts are on in the background. And the carrots is one that's a little harder to judge, but it does come out very tasty. So the marmalade gently melts. You may well need to add a little bit more boiled water. In the meantime, sprouts have finished. I've boiled them. Clean the pan, always good to clean as you go. And I put them into a glass bowl ready to use again. Then I put some oil in the pan and pour in some bacon lardons. You can use normal bacon and just cut it up, but it's good to have that chunky flavour. So I think it's about 150 grams of bacon lardons. I'm going to fry them, and then I'm going to add the sprouts and the chestnuts. So the side dishes we're going to have is marmaladed carrots and sprouts cooked with chestnuts and bacon lardons. The advantage with this bacon lardon recipe is that people who aren't keen on sprouts, the bacon and the sprouts kind of accents each other. This is where really Christmas meal is a multitasking meal. So as the marmalade's melting, I keep adding some warm water that I've boiled to one side. I want to keep it simmering away, effectively steaming it, and you can see the lardons frying in the pan on the other side. And now I'm going to take the chestnuts and the sprouts and throw them in. You can see why you want to prepare this in advance. Just spoon them in, give it a good stir. You want to fry the chestnuts with some brown sugar. You can use demerara and just a few handfuls. I'm sure there's a measure in the recipe. Stir that in. Just brings a bit of sweetness. This really gives you a sprout recipe that people who are a little iffy on sprouts are keen on. And at the same time, you can see the carrots aren't boiling, they're just simmering. Now I throw these pre-boiled, they've already had about 5 or 7 minutes. And now I put it all in, and just the last couple of minutes, stirring it round, making sure that I fry in that flavour. So it's a mixture of sprouts, horse chestnuts and bacon lardons with a little bit of water, about 150 millilitres, and some brown sugar. And that really will give a sweet flavour that people who aren't keen on sprouts will enjoy. And then I swap them over just to make it easier for me because of the temperatures. I want to be bringing the marmalade sauce to the boil. So not really a necessary step, but I just want to check on the potatoes and the parsnips. And you can see a long way to go with cooking, but I'm going to add in a couple of onions. Some people like a roast onion. They need a lot less time. So this is probably 20 minutes in. You're going to have a very well cooked onion at the end, and 2 people chose to have an onion for this meal. And at this point I add in the garlic, because if you put the garlic in at the very beginning, 45 minutes, they'll be shriveled and burned. If you put them in about 25 minutes from the end, they'll be cooked, but probably some of them will still be edible, and some people do like to have a bit of roast garlic. probably a matter of taste. I like to spread them between the potatoes because what we're trying to do with the potatoes here is the goose fat gives a very rich flavour, and then we're infusing it with a dusting of cinnamon, some garlic and some rosemary. Garlic's definitely optional, but you want a very rich flavour. It's a very rich meal. And while we've got the potatoes out, little look at the turkey. Again, each time we take it out, we make sure it's properly covered, make sure it's not burning. Stick it with the fork towards the end, and you should feel some juice come out of it when you do that. So it should slide in very easily, and it should also have a bit of juice come out. If neither of those is happening, still got plenty of time to cook. And you can always take the turkey out, put it to one side for 10 minutes and put it back in if it's got a little bit ahead of itself, or you could take the potatoes out. Now I just wrap it back up, doesn't matter that it's getting a little bit torn. Check back in on the sprouts are now switched off. They're fully cooked. I can just pop a bit of heat under them at the end. And my carrots are coming along nicely and nearly finished. And then it's straight back to the gravy. You want to heat the gravy up. When the gravy's really nicely cooked and you've added a cup of the juice from the turkey every so often, then you take out the carrot, the onion, the heart and the neck. If you have a dog, the dogs will like the neck. You would want to check on the bones with that. Sometimes I do know a couple of people who would eat the vegetables out of that. Certainly there's plenty of goodness in there. Not to everyone's taste, I'd say. Now it's a little thin, but so then I add in some hot water, thicken it with some cornstarch, mixed in a cup with water separately so you can get the right consistency. Thicken it up, and you can add gravy browning. And a secret, you can skip the whole gravy section, use instant gravy, and it's a 5-minute job and a bit more guaranteed. So I'll take the turkey out. A little bit darker colour than I would have liked. Don't worry about that burning on the stuffing. You've got 1.5 kilograms of stuffing there, and about 100 grams is burnt on the surface. So then separate it from the foil and then put it on the board and leave it to rest. You want it to rest for about 10 minutes. Some people say more, but you don't want the meat to be cold. You've cooked it for 5 or 6 hours. It always seems a bit silly to let it go cold. Then slide it off, ideally without breaking the back. And now your turkey's ready for carving. So you could take out the stuffing, take off the drumsticks, the wings, and then start carving the breast. So hopefully that hasn't put you off cooking my favourite meal of the year. And remember, you only cook it once a year, so it's okay to have all those calories. So just to wish you all a Merry Christmas.